The fierce dog blocked the road to prevent the emergency vehicle from passing. When they discovered why he did that, everyone was surprised. On a hectic day in a small town called Woodstock, an ambulance sped through the streets, desperate to save a life. But suddenly, it had to come to a complete stop. A large dog stood firmly in the middle of the road. The animal, with its messy fur and firm stance, seemed determined not to move. He barked forcefully, staring into the ambulance as if to warn of something. His eyes shone with a strange intensity, as if he understood the urgency of the situation, but at the same time refused to allow the vehicle to advance. The paramedics tried to go around, trying to bypass the dog, but he, with relentless determination, moved quickly to block their way, as if on a mission of vital importance. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to come out of their houses to see what was happening. Everyone seemed intrigued by the strange obstacle that had caused the ambulance to stop. Can you imagine being at home, relaxed, watching TV with your family, and suddenly realizing that an ambulance cannot move forward because a dog doesn't want to move? You might think. As strange as it sounds, that was exactly what happened on the streets of Woodstock. This little dog, with his unusual gesture, managed to capture the attention of the entire town. It seemed that his barks and his posture were sending a silent message, as if he wanted to alert everyone to a danger that only he perceived. This unexpected confrontation between the ambulance and the dog became the great enigma of the night. Inside the vehicle, the paramedics were visibly concerned. They had Mr. Mendoza on board, a patient in serious condition. He had burns on his arms and face, and his heart was beating irregularly. With each passing second, the need for medical attention increased, and the pressure mounted inside the ambulance. But, despite everything, the dog did not move, as if aware of something that humans could not understand. The onlookers began to whistle and try to convince the dog to get out of the way. Some offered him delicious pieces of food, thinking they could tempt him to move with some flavor. But Toby, the stubborn dog, was unfazed. His eyes remained focused on the ambulance, and his loud barks echoed down the street, growing more and more intense. It was as if he was warning of imminent danger, though no one knew exactly what it was. His firm attitude, his penetrating gaze, and his barks full of urgency began to generate concern among the neighbors, who began to notice the growing tension in the environment. The neighbors, especially the children who clung tightly to their parents' hands, watched the scene with concern. Some of them had seen that dog walking around town many times, but they had never seen him act like that. Murmurs spread among the crowd, and soon nervousness was felt in the air. It seemed as if a large cloud of anxiety had descended upon the quiet street of Woodstock. Everyone was attentive to Mr. Mendoza's critical condition, but they also began to wonder why the dog was so determined to block the way. The tension on the street of Woodstock could be cut with a knife. The murmurs continued, becoming more and more intense, while the neighbors' gazes remained fixed on the dog, the ambulance, and Mr. Mendoza, who was torn between life and death. Diana, watching from the back, felt a knot in her stomach. She couldn't explain why, but there was something about the dog's gaze that deeply disturbed her. Toby, as she later called him, kept barking incessantly. Each bark was a cry of despair, not of aggression, as if he was trying to communicate a message that only he could understand. Diana, a young veterinarian with a heart as big as her determination, decided to intervene. Even though the others didn't know what to do, she felt she had to get closer. She took a deep breath and, with firm but calm steps, walked towards Toby. Although she was small and her presence might seem fragile, there was something about her walk and her gaze that conveyed a calmness that contrasted with the chaos that surrounded her. The neighbors looked at her in amazement. Some tried to stop her, but Diana did not stop. She knew that although no one else understood it, the dog was not there by chance. There was something deeper in his behavior. "Easy, friend," she whispered as she approached. Toby, who hadn't stopped barking until then, paused for a moment and turned his head towards her. His intense and penetrating gaze softened just a little. Diana raised her hand slowly, giving the dog time to feel her presence, to understand that she did not pose a threat. Time seemed to stand still. The air around him was filled with a kind of tension between what could happen if Toby decided not to trust Diana. But then, against all odds, the dog approached, sniffing her hand and then lightly touching it with his snout. It was a small gesture, but enough for Diana to understand that she had taken a first step towards trust. "It's okay," she said softly, keeping her eyes locked on the dog's. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Toby stopped barking completely, though his body remained tense. Diana crouched down a bit more, almost level with the dog, always maintaining that eye contact that seemed to be key. Around her, the neighbors watched with a mixture of relief and amazement. No one understood why the dog had given in to this young woman, but everyone felt that something important had just happened. Finally, Toby stepped back, allowing the ambulance to pass. Diana sighed, relieved, but a small voice inside her told her that this was not over. There was something else behind that dog's stubbornness. As the ambulance drove away with its lights flashing, Diana was left with Toby, stroking his head gently. Calm slowly returned to the street, but Diana couldn't shake the feeling that this dog was trying to communicate something important. The neighbors returned to their homes, murmuring about what had happened, while Diana decided to take Toby to her house. That night, while Diana was preparing some food for Toby, she sat down to observe him carefully. There was something about him that she couldn't decipher. He wasn't just a stray dog. He seemed to have a mission, an intention beyond the obvious. Every time they went for a walk, Toby seemed to take her to different parts of town, always with a silent urgency. It wasn't just any walk. He was looking for something or someone. The next morning, Diana woke up with a feeling of uneasiness that would not let her rest. She had spent much of the night going over what was happening. Since Toby had come into her life, everything seemed to have been transformed into a constant enigma. Although he was just a dog, there was something about his behavior that made her think he was trying to tell her something, as if every step he took was guided by a hidden reason. After having a quick coffee and feeding Toby, Diana decided it was time to follow the trail that the dog seemed to insist on showing her. Although she didn't know exactly what she was looking for, she was sure she would find answers. She put on a light jacket, took Toby's leash, and headed for the door. "Come on, boy," Diana said, as she fastened the leash to Toby's collar. "Today, we are going to see where else you take us." The dog, as if he understood perfectly, wagged his tail energetically and began to walk with a firm step towards the street. Diana noticed that this time Toby did not hesitate for a second in choosing the direction. He took the main street of the town, ignoring the greetings of the neighbors who were starting their day, and kept walking without stopping. He walked with such confidence that Diana could barely keep up. Finally, they reached the outskirts of town, where the houses began to disappear and the vacant lots and old warehouses became the dominant landscape. Toby slowed his pace as they came to a stop in front of an abandoned warehouse, one that Diana barely remembered seeing before. The place, with its weathered walls and broken windows, looked like it hadn't been touched in centuries. "Is this it?" Diana murmured, looking at the building with some distrust. "What are you looking for, Toby?" The dog, without wasting time, began to sniff around the entrance. Diana followed him, feeling a chill run down her spine. The air was impregnated with a strange sensation, as if the place itself held secrets that it did not want to reveal. Toby stopped in front of a side door, the same one that seemed to have been forced open at some point, and began to scratch at it insistently. Diana cautiously pushed the door open. It creaked open, revealing a dark and cold interior. Toby entered without hesitation, sniffing the ground as if he were following a trail that Diana could not see. She turned on her cell phone flashlight and began to explore the place, which was full of old boxes and accumulated dust. It wasn't long before Toby stopped again, this time in front of a corner full of rubble. He began to dig with a determination Diana had not seen before. With each movement, he tossed chunks of wood and pieces of brick to the side, until finally something caught Diana's eye. Underneath the rubble, half buried, was an object that Toby carefully unearthed. Diana approached and, with trembling hands, picked up what the dog had found. It was a cap, dirty and worn, but recognizable. The Woodstock Fire Department emblem was still visible, despite the dust covering it. Turning it over, she could see a name embroidered inside. Sebastian. "Oh my God," whispered Diana, feeling her heart pounding. Sebastian, the firefighter who had disappeared days ago without a trace, had been here. But why? What had happened? She looked at Toby, who was watching her with eyes filled with a strange mixture of sadness and urgency. She knew that this dog was not just any animal. There was more to his story, something she had to find out. She decided that the next stop would be the fire station. She had to talk to someone who knew Sebastian well and who could help her understand what was going on. With the cap firmly in her hands and Toby by her side, Diana walked back to town. As she walked the now deserted streets, she noticed that the day had clouded over, as if the sky itself reflected the uncertainty she felt inside. They arrived at the fire station, a red brick building that had always been a symbol of security in the town. Upon entering, Diana was greeted by one of the firefighters, an older man named Samuel, who knew her by sight. "Diana, what brings you here?" he asked with a mixture of surprise and curiosity in his voice. "I need to talk to someone about Sebastian," she replied, showing him the cap she had found. Samuel turned pale upon seeing the cap and invited her into the office. There, Diana told him everything about Toby, how she had found him, and how the dog had led her to the warehouse where she found the cap. Samuel listened attentively, his face growing more and more somber. "That dog," he finally said, "is no ordinary dog. It's Rex, Sebastian's dog. They worked together for years, inseparable. If Rex led you to that cap, then something very serious has happened." Diana felt a lump in her throat as she listened to Samuel's words. She knew that what had started out as a simple mystery with a lost dog was turning into something much darker and more dangerous. The wind blew softly through the streets of Woodstock, causing the dry leaves to dance on the pavement. The apparent calm of the town contrasted with the storm of thoughts that shook Diana's mind. Samuel's words echoed in her head like a constant echo. Something very serious has happened. She couldn't ignore the growing feeling that she was about to discover something much bigger than she had imagined. Toby, as always, walked beside her with the same silent determination that had characterized him from day one. His steps were firm, sure, as if he knew exactly where they should go. Diana, although nervous, decided to be guided by the dog's instinct. After all, it had been Toby who had led her to Sebastian's cap, and she was sure that he knew more than he could express. The morning progressed slowly as they walked several streets of the town. Diana couldn't help but observe every detail with greater attention. The closed windows, the fleeting glances of the neighbors hiding behind the curtains, and the heavy air that seemed to envelop everything around them. There was something in the atmosphere, a feeling of latent danger that she couldn't quite comprehend, but that kept her alert. After several minutes of walking, Toby led her to a small park on the outskirts of town. The place, which would normally be filled with children playing and people strolling, was deserted. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the crunching of branches beneath their feet. Diana felt a shiver run down her spine as she watched Toby begin to sniff the ground with an urgency she hadn't seen before. The dog stopped at a specific point, near a weather-beaten wooden bench. Diana crouched down next to him, trying to see what had caught his attention. The ground was dark, as if something had burned there recently. A smell of ash still lingered in the air, mixed with the humidity of the morning dew. Diana ran her fingers through the dirt, feeling the rough, cold texture. "What happened here, Toby?" she murmured, as if the dog could give her an answer that she could not find. The dog looked up, carefully observing the deserted park. He seemed to be on alert, as if waiting for something to happen at any moment. Diana stood up, looking around with narrowed eyes. There were no signs of people nearby, but the feeling of being watched did not leave her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every shadow around her could hide a dark secret. Toby, noticing Diana's tension, let out a low growl, a low sound that vibrated in the air and increased the feeling of unease in her. She decided it was time to return to the fire station and share what she had discovered with Samuel. Although it wasn't much, the connection between the places Toby was taking her and the traces of recent fires couldn't be a coincidence. As they walked back to town, Diana couldn't help but wonder what exactly Toby was looking for. Was Sebastian involved in these fires? Or had he discovered something that put him in danger? Each step she took brought her closer to a truth she was afraid to discover, but that she knew was inevitable. Upon reaching the fire station, Samuel was waiting for her at the door with an expression of concern etched on his face. Diana explained what she had found in the park and how Toby had reacted to the smell of ash. Samuel listened in silence, nodding slowly. "Diana," he finally said, his tone grave, "I think we are dealing with something much bigger than it seems." Sebastian mentioned something about these fires before he disappeared, but he didn't elaborate. He just said something didn't add up, something that made him uneasy. "Now that you've found these clues, I fear he might be in danger. Or worse." Samuel's words hung in the air, heavy with a fear they both shared. Diana felt the weight of the situation becoming more palpable, like a slab that threatened to crush her. But despite that fear, she also felt a growing determination, an imperative need to move forward and uncover the truth, however painful it might be. "We have to do something, Samuel," said Diana firmly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "We can't stand idly by while Sebastian is out there somewhere, maybe needing our help." Samuel nodded again, his expression grave but determined. "You're right, Diana. We can't ignore what's happening. We're going to gather some of the guys from the firehouse. We need to investigate those fires more thoroughly, and any leads we can find." Diana looked at Toby, who was sitting beside her, his eyes fixed on her. There was a mixture of urgency and trust in his gaze, as if he knew they were on the right track. "Don't worry, boy," thought Diana. "We're going to find Sebastian. You're not alone in this." The day dawned with a grey sky and a dense fog that enveloped the entire town of Woodstock. The sun barely managed to penetrate that thick layer of clouds, creating a somber atmosphere that seemed to foreshadow something dark. Diana prepared to go out once more, with Toby by her side, as he had been since this whole mystery began. The determination in the dog's eyes was the same as always, but that morning there was something different in the air, an almost palpable tension. Toby led her out of town, towards the limits of Woodstock, where empty fields and forgotten old buildings marked the end of the road. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the soft murmur of the wind whistling through the dry branches of the trees. Diana shivered as she followed Toby, who was walking with determined steps towards a destination only he knew. Finally, they arrived at an old warehouse, one that appeared to have been abandoned many years ago. The brick walls were covered in moss and cracks, and the windows, broken and dirty, let in just a sliver of light that dimly illuminated the interior. The place, at first glance, offered nothing more than desolation, but Diana knew there was something hidden in those shadows, something Toby was determined to show her. Toby stopped in front of the warehouse door, looking at Diana as if asking for permission to enter. She swallowed hard, trying to calm her racing heart. Everything in her screamed at her to turn around, not to enter that place, but at the same time, she knew she had no choice. Something very important was hidden there, something that could be the key to finding Sebastian. She pushed the door open carefully, and it swung open with a long, sharp creak that echoed in the thick air. Toby entered first, and Diana followed, her flashlight only illuminating a few feet ahead of her. The interior of the warehouse was covered in dust and cobwebs, and the air had a musty smell that she found unpleasant. Shadows moved around her, cast by the dim light coming through the broken windows, creating unsettling figures that seemed to watch her from every corner. Each step she took was a challenge to her nerves, and the sound of her own feet on the dusty floor made her feel more vulnerable. Toby moved forward without hesitation, his paws making barely a sound on the ground. But with each step the dog took, Diana felt the distance between them and danger shorten. Suddenly, Toby stopped dead in his tracks. Diana looked at him, her heart pounding. The dog lifted his head and began to bark, a strong, insistent bark, as if calling to someone. The sound bounced off the warehouse walls, making it seem even more empty and eerie. Diana, her heart in her mouth, shone her flashlight towards where Toby was looking. What she saw took her breath away. There, in the darkest corner of the warehouse among old boxes and rubble, was Sebastian. His body was covered in dust and his clothes torn, but what struck her most was his condition. Injured, but alive. Sebastian was semi-conscious, his head slumped to one side, as if he barely had the strength to stay awake. "Sebastian," murmured Diana, her voice choked with emotion. Toby ran to him, wagging his tail with a mixture of joy and despair. The dog snuggled next to his owner, gently licking his face as if to comfort him, assuring him that everything would be okay now that he had found him. Sebastian, feeling the touch of his faithful companion, opened his eyes with effort, and a weak smile spread across his face. "Rex," he whispered hoarsely, using his dog's original name. "I knew you would come." Diana felt tears welling up in her eyes. All the fear and tension she had felt up to that moment transformed into a deep relief at seeing Sebastian alive. Wasting no time, she took out her phone and called the emergency services. Her voice was firm, although still trembling with emotion. "We need an ambulance and the police at the old warehouse north of town. Quickly!" While waiting for help to arrive, she knelt beside Sebastian, who seemed to be struggling to stay conscious. Diana took his hand, trying to convey some strength to him. "We are here, Sebastian. You're safe now," she said softly, though she knew there was still much to be uncovered. Sebastian tried to speak, but weakness overcame him, and he closed his eyes, breathing heavily. Diana felt that every second that passed was crucial. Toby, for his part, did not leave his owner's side, remaining vigilant as if he understood that they were not out of danger yet. Finally, the sounds of sirens broke the oppressive silence of the warehouse. The ambulance and the patrol car arrived almost simultaneously, and the paramedics quickly entered the place. Diana showed them where Sebastian was, and they immediately got to work, stabilizing him before transferring him to the stretcher. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as Sebastian was rushed to the hospital. The tension of the previous night still weighed heavily on Diana's shoulders, who had not been able to close her eyes. Toby, always by her side, looked at her with his eyes full of canine wisdom, as if he understood that the danger had not yet passed. At the hospital, the doctors worked with precision, tending to Sebastian's injuries and stabilizing his condition. Meanwhile, Diana remained in the waiting room, her mind occupied with what had happened. Every detail of the previous night ran through her mind like a black and white movie, full of scenes she couldn't quite comprehend. Hours later, a doctor emerged from the room and told her that Sebastian was stable and conscious. Though exhausted, Diana felt immense relief to know that Sebastian was going to recover. She walked towards the room with slow steps, accompanied by Toby, who remained silent, as if he knew that this moment required calm. Upon entering, she found Sebastian lying in bed, pale but with an expression of gratitude on his face. His eyes lit up when he saw Toby, who immediately approached, wagging his tail and licking his owner's hand devotedly. Diana sat down next to the bed, and for a few minutes, silence was all that accompanied them. It was a heavy silence, laden with unanswered questions, but also with relief at having made it this far. "Sebastian," Diana began softly, "when we found Toby, something very strange happened. He blocked the path of an ambulance that was carrying an injured man, Mr. Mendoza. I didn't understand why he did it at the time, but now I think there's more to all of this." Sebastian, his gaze fixed on Toby, nodded slowly. "Diana," he replied, his voice weak but firm. "Toby has always been a special dog. Before I disappeared, I was investigating some fires that occurred in town. They were small, seemingly insignificant, but something didn't add up. And then I became suspicious of Mendoza." Diana felt a chill run down her spine. Sebastian continued, "Mendoza has been in town for a long time. Everyone knows him and no one would suspect him. But Toby detected him. His sense of smell is exceptional. He must have recognized Mendoza's scent at one of the fire sites." The revelation left Diana speechless for a moment. Everything was starting to make sense. Toby hadn't acted irrationally. He had tried to stop the real culprit from escaping. "So, you think Mendoza is responsible for those fires?" asked Diana, trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. "I'm almost certain," replied Sebastian with effort. "When I realized that there was something strange about those fires, I wanted to confront him, but I disappeared before I could. Now I understand why Toby did what he did. He didn't want Mendoza to get away." Diana nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She stood up with determination and left the room, leaving Sebastian to rest. She went directly to the officers who had arrived at the hospital, explained what Sebastian had told her, and how Toby had identified Mendoza. The officers acted immediately. They knew they couldn't waste any time, and quickly went to the area where Mendoza was being treated for his burns. They arrested him right there, to the surprise of everyone who knew him. The news spread quickly through Woodstock, and disbelief mingled with outrage. How could someone so well-known and seemingly trustworthy be behind something so terrible? Meanwhile, at the hospital, Diana returned to Sebastian's room. She sat down beside him, and with a tired smile she said, "They've arrested him. Mendoza won't be able to hurt anyone else." Sebastian closed his eyes, relieved. "Thank you, Diana. Thank you for trusting Toby, and for not giving up." Diana looked at him, feeling the weight she had been carrying for those days finally beginning to disappear. "It wasn't just me, Sebastian. Toby knew what he was doing, and now I know I should never have doubted him." Toby, who had remained silent at one side, lifted his head and looked at both of them with his eyes full of intelligence and loyalty. He had done his duty, and now, finally, he could rest. The news of Mendoza's arrest spread through Woodstock like the fire he himself had started. Within hours, every corner of the town knew the dark secret that had remained hidden beneath the guise of an ordinary and respected man. No one could believe it. Mr. Mendoza, that kind neighbor who always said hello with a smile, had been the perpetrator of the fires that had caused so much damage. Dismay was widespread, but admiration for Toby and Diana was not long in coming among the inhabitants. The bravery of the dog and the perseverance of the young veterinarian became the topic of conversation everywhere. In cafes, shops, and squares, the story was repeated with pride, as if the entire town had been part of that feat. "God, that dog! Who would have thought he'd save us from something so serious?" the ladies could be heard saying as they whispered about what had happened. And the girl, so determined. She didn't rest until she found Sebastian. While the town tried to process the reality, the police and the fire department did not rest. The investigations into the fires took an even deeper turn. They found hidden documents and evidence that revealed Mendoza's true plan. He wanted to develop a real estate project on land that had already been designated as protected. The fires were an excuse to damage the area and then claim it for his own purposes. His plan was ambitious and selfish, but thanks to Toby and Diana, it had been thwarted in time. The following days were ones of collective effort. Woodstock, a town united by adversity, began working to recover what had been lost. Cafes and shops became volunteer centers. Everyone wanted to help rebuild the places that had been damaged by the fires. It was as if each person, by contributing with a small gesture, was exorcising the shadows that Mendoza had brought with him. Diana, though exhausted, couldn't help but feel a deep satisfaction. As she walked through the town, she saw people rolling up their sleeves and working side by side with renewed energy. Toby, always by her side, had earned the respect and affection of everyone. Now they called him the hero of Woodstock, and every time someone saw him, they would offer him a pat or a kind word. Preparations for the grand ceremony began early that morning in Woodstock. Flags waved in the main square, and the buzz of the neighbors could be felt in every corner of the town. Everyone wanted to be part of the event. It was not just a celebration, it was a recognition of Toby, the dog who had become the community's unexpected hero. For many, Toby was not just an animal. He represented the courage and hope they needed in such a dark time. The mayor, a man with a deep voice and a serious demeanor, had organized the ceremony with the utmost respect. He knew it was not just a symbolic occasion, but a genuine tribute to a being who, without words, had saved lives. When the clock struck 10 in the morning, the square was already packed with people. Adults, children, and the elderly had gathered to witness the presentation of the Medal of Honor to Toby. No one wanted to miss the moment. Sebastian, still recovering, arrived accompanied by Diana. Although he still looked weak, he had insisted on being present to pay tribute to his loyal companion and to the young veterinarian who, with such dedication, had saved not only his life, but also that of the town. Toby walked beside them, his tail wagging gently, almost as if he understood that the crowd was there for him. The mayor took the stage and approached the microphone. In a clear voice, he began to speak about the bravery and courage of a dog who had done the impossible. "Today, we are not here just to celebrate Toby," he said, looking at the crowd. "We are here to remember that in the darkest of times, courage and loyalty can come from the most unexpected places." The mayor's words resonated deeply with everyone present. Every resident of Woodstock had somehow felt the impact of what had happened. The fires, the fear, the betrayal of a man they all knew. And yet, it was a dog, a simple dog who had guided them to the truth. It was a reminder that courage knows no bounds. Sebastian took the microphone after the mayor. His voice trembled slightly, but the words that came out of his mouth were firm and sincere. "Toby, or Rex as I knew him, is not just my partner. He is a loyal friend, a hero. His instinct and bravery saved my life and uncovered the truth that many could not see. And I can't forget Diana. Without her, we wouldn't be here today." The crowd applauded loudly, and Diana, visibly moved, smiled shyly. She knew that none of this was just her doing, but the result of the community coming together, of the support everyone had given in the most difficult of times. Finally, the mayor called Toby to the stage. The dog, always calm, sat down as the gold medal was placed around his neck. "Toby, on behalf of Woodstock, we declare you an honorary citizen of our beloved town," the mayor said proudly. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was a moment that would remain in everyone's memory. A dog, a hero, and a community stronger and more united than ever. The story of Toby, Diana, and Sebastian in Woodstock is more than a tale of mystery or suspense. It is a deeply human and emotional journey that teaches us about loyalty, courage, and the importance of community. Diana's journey, a young veterinarian who faces the unknown, guided only by a dog, reflects the strength of those who, although they seem fragile, find within themselves the courage to overcome obstacles. Toby, a dog with a keen instinct and a loyal heart, shows that heroes can come in all forms. Through his unwavering loyalty, he not only saves his owner, but also uncovers the hidden truth in the town. His connection with Sebastian is a powerful reminder of the special relationship between humans and animals, and how that connection can transcend the limits of common understanding. The story leaves us with a clear lesson. Courage does not always lie in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday actions of empathy, sacrifice, and unity. In the end, the town of Woodstock not only regains its peace, but learns the value of working together in the face of adversity. If you found this story as moving as we did, please like and comment to let us know how you feel. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other meaningful stories.